Welcome to the Beyond Atheism podcast, with me, Nathan Alexander, and my co-host, Todd Tavares. Moving beyond questions of God's existence, this podcast asks, what's next in a world without God? If you're enjoying the show so far, make sure to like and subscribe, rate and review, and consider supporting us on Patreon.
Today is a little unusual for Beyond Atheism. Normally, we like to focus on the positive gains made by the secular atheist community. But unfortunately, recent U.S. Supreme Court rulings cause us to take a slightly different approach and to examine what appears to be a big win for the religious right. Thankfully, we are joined by Rob Boston, Senior Advisor at Americans United for Separation of Church and State, to tell us more about the Americans United organization, as well as the Kennedy versus Bremerton School District ruling, and the road ahead for church-state politics. Rob has been with Americans United for more than 35 years, where he is also the editor of Church and State, AU's monthly membership magazine. He has written extensively on the religious right, with his most recent book on the subject being Taking Liberties, Why Religious Freedom Doesn't Give You the Right to Tell Other People What to Do. Rob, welcome to Beyond Atheism.
Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rob, for coming on. Just to begin, usually we ask about sort of personal background. So how did you come to be involved with Americans United? And what was, so you were involved for over 30 years. So how did you get involved in the first place? And what was happening when you first joined?
Right. Yeah, I'd be happy to talk to you a little bit about that. I was a journalism major in college back in the 80s, graduated in 1985. And my interest at that time was being a newspaper reporter, which I did for a little while. But I had an itch to leave central Pennsylvania, where I was born and raised, go down to Washington, D.C. and do some policy-oriented work. So that's what I did. I moved down to the D.C. area, got just kind of a routine editing job, keeping my eye open for something that would be more in line with what I wanted to do, which was policy. Now, I always had an interest in separation of church and state for two reasons. One is the history that I've read, and I do enjoy reading history. Pretty much shows conclusively that whenever religion and government are combined, freedom is crushed. It never is lifted up. So from history, I was aware of that. You needed to keep those two institutions separate. The second reason was a more personal experience that I had as a kid, where I attended a Catholic school for 8 years, and we were forced to pray every day, like 3 times a day, like clockwork. You just had to say these prayers. Now, this was a private school. They could do that. But to me, I really just got turned off on the idea of spirituality being something you could just turn on and off like a light switch because a priest or a nun was ordering you to have a religious experience. It seemed to me that the only way that prayer or spiritual exercises could be meaningful was if you really wanted to take part, not if you were being forced. So those are a couple of reasons. And when I was hired at Americans United in 1987, I was the assistant editor of the magazine Church and State, which I did for 25 years. Then the editor retired, and then I became the editor. So it's been a real interesting experience for me, and then I've been able to write and comment on just about all facets of church-state relations, and I've traveled, and I give speeches, and I've done television. It's been a fascinating experience. Unfortunately, as we've noted here, we have had quite a downturn recently, though.
Yeah. Before we get to the current one, take us back 35 years, and how has that changed? I mean, at the height of Reagan, it was seen as the moral majority. It's seen as evangelical Christians are going to take over. What were the struggles then, and how were they? How did they transform the political realm?
Right. Yeah. Let me just step back a little bit, even earlier than Reagan, to kind of set the stage a little bit. The 60s and 70s were a period where respect for separation of church and state at the Supreme Court really reached a high water mark. We had the school prayer decisions in 1962 and 1963, and rulings in the 70s that struck down direct tax support to religious schools and so on. So you had this real strong support for separation during that period. Now, that did begin to erode during the 80s, during the Reagan presidency. He and subsequently George H.W. Bush made appointments to the Supreme Court, put individuals on there who who really didn't respect that principle. At the same time, you did have the rise of what scholars called the religious right, this very conservative social movement that had a number of goals. One was they wanted to oppose the growing LGBTQ rights movement. They wanted to overturn legal abortion, which of course they just did. They wanted to censor books and material and used in public schools and make it harder for kids to learn certain things. They attacked evolution, and generally they were hostile to public education entirely, and they were trying to shift as much money away from public schools as they could into the coffers of private religious academies. So you had this very aggressive attack on separation of church and state by this political movement that had many facets.
And it started about 40 years ago, and by Reagan they're in the halls of power.
Yes, they did have certainly a lot of success under Reagan. Remember, Reagan was speaking to a conservative religious group, and I don't remember which one, but he said, "I know you can't endorse me, because the law doesn't allow religious groups to endorse candidates." He said, "I know you can't endorse me, but I want you to know that I endorse you." So they had this champion in the White House for 8 years, and that did have an effect, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wanted to ask about Americans United, and it wouldn't be right, I guess, to call it like an atheist organization, because I imagine there's also potentially religious people who are involved as well, who are also interested in preserving the separation of church and state. Maybe can you just talk about what is the religious or I guess, yeah, religious orientation, if there is one, of the organization?
Yes, that's a very interesting question because our history is, well, it's unusual. First of all, Americans United was founded in 1947. So you're talking about an organization that's 75 years old. And we were founded originally by Protestant Christian religious leaders. So we had this religious founding. Yeah, absolutely. And if you go back and, I have some archival material in the office, and if you go back and look at some of our early conferences from the late 40s and 50s, they opened with prayers. People sang hymns. There were,
Right.
ministers giving sermons. Now,
Yes.
there were always non-Christians involved from the beginning.
Hmm.
There
Hmm.
were Jews and there were secularists. Now, in the late 1940s, it wasn't really socially acceptable to be like an atheist or a humanist. And even now, it's not easy in some parts of the country. But back then, it was just one of those things that if you had that perspective, you generally didn't go around blabbing about it. So
Right. Yes.
I'm sure there were secularists involved in the organization at that time, but they were quiet. Now, over the years, the composition of the organization changed, and while we've always had religious membership, and in fact, from 1992 until 2017, we were led by Barry Lynn, who was a United Church of Christ minister. So we've had this religious perspective, but there has been a great growth in the secularist wing as well. I mean, the whole idea behind Americans United was like the name suggests, it's a bunch of Americans United. You bring everybody together to work on this issue of separation of church and state. So it doesn't matter if the person is a devout Christian or a Jew or a Muslim or a Buddhist or a Hindu, or if they're an atheist or a humanist or agnostic or a Wiccan or a pagan. We don't care. Everybody gets together and supports the idea of separation of church and state. And I think that one of the things that distinguishes us from some of the atheist groups or the humanist groups that work on this issue is that we do have a broad perspective. Now, just to be clear, I'm not knocking any of those groups because I think they do great work and we're in partnership with them. But our membership has always been a little bit broader.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really important. I mean, because yeah, I mean, it's in many people's interest that that the separation is maintained. Maybe, I mean, can you just maybe spell out like what is the, or like, well, you mentioned that Protestants were involved in the founding. What is the religious case, I guess, for secularism?
Right. If you look at historically, say, Baptists in America, now you wouldn't know this today if you look at the Southern Baptists, but historically, Baptists were strong defenders of separation of church and state because they believed that the government should have no say in how individuals worship, who they worship with, if they worship, how they interpreted God. There were some Baptist leaders, like in the 18th century or during the time of the founders. John Leland comes to mind, who just would say things about separation of church and state that just are remarkable to read today. John Leland, for example, once said, "The notion of an officially Christian commonwealth should be exploded forever." I mean, and this is a Baptist minister. And he argued for just getting the government out of people's religious lives, believing that it had created so much heartache and war and violence in Europe. And one thing that really shines through if you read his history of the founding period and the founders' views, many of the key founders like Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, George Washington, and others, they were keen students of history. Now, the European experience was not far removed from their time. They knew about the religious wars, the violence, the persecution, the inquisitions, how people were murdered. And things like that had happened in the American colonial period as well. So they were aware of that. And their view was that the only way to ensure human freedom was to just get the government out of the business of having a favorite religion and persecuting everybody who didn't agree with it.
Mm. Mm. So their approach was more about it being harm. Well, is there part of an approach that says it's harmful to the religion, or is it more
Yes,
about
absolutely.
protect? Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think some of the early religious leaders who were very strong on the separation of church and state believed that that protective barrier, that what Jefferson called the wall of separation between church and state, would protect their churches, would protect their religion. Now, remember, before the Revolution and even after the Revolution, depending on where you were in the United States or in the colonies, your rights could vary. If you lived in Virginia, for example, and you were not a member of the Anglican Church, which was the established Church of Virginia, and you were not a member, you had less rights than people who were members of that church. James Madison once wrote to a friend in Philadelphia with just righteous anger because Madison observed Baptist preachers in jail for no other reason than that they had preached their doctrines on the street in public. And that offended the Anglican establishment. They had these people arrested. They put them in jail. So you might not have your rights, if you were a Baptist in Virginia, if you were a Baptist in the Carolinas, which again was Anglican establishment, if you were in New England, which the remnants of the old Puritan church, the Congregational church, was officially established, and you weren't a member of that, your rights were not protected. Maybe you had to pay taxes to support an established church that you didn't belong to and that you disagreed with. This was not a theoretical construct to founders. They were observing this, and they knew that the only way to stop this was to divide religion.
Right, because it was a lived experience. It's not even history in those cases. That's
right, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, these people can see what was happening. I mentioned that letter that Madison wrote. He wrote to a friend in Philadelphia because Pennsylvania had more religious liberty and a freer system there. And Madison expressed his desire to breathe the free air of Philadelphia, to have that sort of spirit of liberty come to Virginia. And you know what? He didn't just complain about it. He made it happen. As Madison, pushed Thomas Jefferson's famous Virginia Statute for Religious Liberty through the assembly and made it into law. So he wasn't just, carping about it in a letter. He took action against it.
Yeah. And by making the Constitution the way it did to omit religion and not have that, it shows that they made a choice to make America.
That's right. James Madison is considered to be the father of the Constitution, and indeed he strong influence on that document and the Bill of Rights as well. He's a primary author of the First Amendment, and the First Amendment, does two things. It guarantees no establishment of religion and protects the free exercise of religion. Same thing that the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom did in Virginia. So that experience of Virginia, Madison took that to the national stage. And now, just to be clear here, none of this was done to suppress religion or keep it down. It was done to make it possible for everybody to make their own decisions about religious matters without the state telling you, well, you're a lesser citizen because you're a Baptist or you're an Anglican or you're a Quaker or you're a Catholic, whatever. everybody was just going to be on an even keel. And the results of that speak for themselves in
Yeah.
this country.
But those two rights, yeah, in the First Amendment, you have no establishment on the one hand, and you also have free expression. But sometimes those come into tension, right? You can't have both at the same time necessarily. And that's what they argued in the Bremerton case. Is that correct?
Yes, that is. They basically made a free speech and a religious freedom argument. And you're right. I mean, there can be occasions where those two concepts come into tension. But generally speaking, I think if we just had some sensible ground rules, we could avoid that sort of thing. And we had those rules in place until recently. Now the Supreme Court's eroding them.
So what were
One of those
what were the rules in the past, and what happened with Coach Kennedy? Can you give us background on that
right,
very
yeah,
quickly?
exactly. Well, and in the past, there was always special protection for public schools. Public schools are teaching kids from lots of different religious perspectives, as well as children who may have no particular religious background. And they're just not supposed to be in the business of promoting religion. The Supreme Court made that clear in the school prayer cases from the early 60s, and there were state cases in state courts before that, going back to the 19th century. I mean, making it very clear that the public school system is designed to impart secular instruction, not to push religion onto anybody. And the understanding had been that if you work in the public school system, if you're a teacher, principal, an administrator, staff, or a coach, or whatever you might be, you don't get to promote your religion or persuade young people to come in and take part of it with you. So that was one of the sensible rules we had, but now the Supreme Court's breaking that down. Now, what's really frustrating about that Kennedy v. Bremerton case is that the court made that decision on the basis of basically a bunch of lies.
Okay. So in this case, the coach, what was the coach doing that started the problem?
After the football games, and these are high school football games, Bremerton, Washington, this coach would go down to the 50-yard line and he'd have this prayer right at the 50-yard line. And he was doing this in front of everybody. And the message being sent was that students should come and join him. Now, he would claim, no, that's not the case. I just wanted to pray privately. But the school tried to accommodate him if he wanted to pray privately. They had a space he could have gone to pray. Or they would have allowed him to go to the 50-yard line, later after folks had gone. He wanted to do this in public, and he wanted these students to come down with him. And the reason I said that the decision was based on lies was because the claim that he wanted to pray privately is undercut by photographs that show him on the field surrounded by like dozens of people, students and from both teams and bystanders and people who had attended the game coming down there onto the field. That's not a private prayer. You can see for your own eyes what's going on there. It's a big public display. So, it used to be the court would balance the rights. They would say, yeah, this gentleman, this coach should have the right to pray, but not in a way that's going to pressure or coerce any young people to join him, because that's not right.
Yeah, because we know that there were members of the team in uniform. So he's there as their coach. They're there as his team, and they're kneeling around him and praying at the 50-yard line after the game.
Right, and there's certainly, I'd say, at the very least, a subtle form of coercion, if not a more direct form of coercion. I mean, if you're a player on that team, you want to get out on the field. One way to do that is to get on coach's good side by making sure you're there for his prayers. And we did have instances where students did say, our organization represented the school in this case. The school was sued by the coach.
Well, like under the old rules, what could they do about this? Could they fire him
they could have fired him if he refused to listen to what they wanted him to do instead. Like I said, they were willing to accommodate him. They found space for him to pray privately in a truly private manner. Well, that wasn't good enough for him. He insisted on being at the 50-yard line. And, aside from this just big public display of prayer that was coercing people to take part, there was just a health hazard. You've got dozens of people running down on the field and, people get knocked over and stuff. So there were safety concerns as well. And they basically said to him, look, we'll make this space for you to pray. That wasn't good enough. So they did fire him. And he then, backed by this religious right legal group, sued the school. And unfortunately, given the climate at the Supreme Court now, he was able to win.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just saying to Todd before we started just that I had read a little bit about the case, but I didn't know a ton about it. But I read the majority decision and the dissent, and reading like the majority's decision, I thought like, it's kind of they make a good case really. And then I read the dissent, and like the majority opinion leaves out so much. Like they portray him as just this humble guy trying to have a private prayer, and like, and then you read the other side of it, and he's like inviting or contacting the press, and like basically just sort of trying to create a spectacle of this. And there's just like like he said, like pandemonium on the field, and apparently even like some of the other coaches on the team, I guess, there's such controversy around it, like they feared for their own safety. It's a pretty
Well,
crazy
I'll say
decision.
one
Yeah.
thing about
Hmm.
the religious right legal groups that bring cases like this, and that is that they're very good at stage managing everything and controlling the narrative and distorting what really happened. Now, part of this was made possible simply because the Supreme Court has become radicalized. And there was a time when a case like this never would have even reached the Supreme Court. They wouldn't even wanted to hear something like this.
So are you
The court's willing to buy into this deceitful narrative.
Are you suggesting that this isn't an organic case where a man just wanted to pray and was fired by his boss and then had a personal struggle pushing it through the courts all the way to the Supreme Court? Like these things don't happen like that, right? It's not like a movie. You're talking about this being stage managed. Who is sort of directing these legal attacks?
Well, there are a number of organizations out there that are religious right, Christian nationalist legal groups. The one that brought this case was called First Liberty, but there's a bunch of others, Alliance Defending Freedom, and Liberty Council, and they always have these names that make them sound like they're promoting freedom
Yes.
and justice
Right.
and fairness.
Yeah.
Of course, that's the last thing they're trying to do. They're white Christian nationalist supremacist organizations that are seeking to create privilege for conservative forms of Christianity and perpetuate that order and have that be, supreme above every other faith or non-faith. And yeah, these things are definitely stage managed. I mean, they go around looking for people to bring cases like this. And that's the reason why we're only going to see more of this. Their normal method is to just keep pushing and just keep chipping away. They've got a favorable court right now, and they're just going to keep going after these things, just like they did with abortion. That ruling, the Dobbs case, that was 49 years of work on the part of these
Yes.
groups.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Now, as much as I disagree with the outcome, I have to give them some credit for their tenacity. And I
Yeah.
sometimes wonder if our side would have had the determination to stick with something like that for 49 years. I mean, they would get an anti-abortion law passed. It would be struck down, and the next day they'd be back with another bill. They just kept doing it until they got the result they wanted. So, as much as I despise what's happened, maybe we could take a lesson from these groups.
The organization is astounding to me. Like you said, like the dedication, but also like everything. Like you have grassroots groups organized with national groups, organized with Congress critters, organized with groups that pick judges or that suggest judges to the governing party, to the Republicans. I mean, like it's such a vast, powerful network that's so singularly focused. It's incredible.
Absolutely. Yes. And I'll tell you another thing about it. First of all, they've got a ton of money. They raise so much money. It runs into billions. I mean, literally, I'm not exaggerating. It's a lot of money.
And
yes.
is it small donors or is there a bit dark money?
It's some small donors. But there's also, money coming in from very well-heeled individuals who are interested in changing this country, maybe for other reasons, but, will use social conservative issues to rile people up. But another thing that they do is they've got everything covered, as you mentioned. They've got a legal arm, so they're pushing into courts. They have political arms that are getting people elected. They have communications arms that are out there disseminating these messages and putting out this false narrative in all these cases. It's well funded, well organized, and unfortunately they've been successful.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is sort of the consequence of the case? Like, what's going to happen now? Do you think we're going to be seeing teachers and so on pushing religion in a more direct way after this ruling?
Unfortunately, I think we will. The ruling leaves some things unanswered, and I'm trying to imagine if you were the sort of lawyer who advises a school district out there somewhere, and they want to know, well, what can happen now, what's legal, what's not. It's difficult to give an honest answer for that because so much is left unanswered. And the real problem is there are parts of the country where people welcome this sort of thing. They're in the Bible Belt, or even not even in the Bible Belt. I mean, just smaller communities all over the country where they've been wanting to get more religion into schools. And when I say religion, I mean conservative
Yeah,
Christianity.
right. Yes.
So they're going to embrace a ruling like this, and they're going to encourage staff members and teachers and others to push the envelope and promote religion in classrooms and do things that they hadn't been allowed to do for like 60 years. So yeah, it's definitely going to be a problem. And also too, as I mentioned earlier, these groups, they don't stop. They'll go after something else next. For instance, 1992, the Supreme Court struck down school-sponsored prayer at graduation ceremony. It's a case called Lee v. Weissman. And that was a 5-4 decision, so it was a pretty close decision at the time. Well, I could see them going after that next and arguing, these prayers at a graduation ceremony, it's a tradition. We've had prayers at events for a long time. That's a big deal. It's only one day. And the court, the way it's constituted right now, might accept an argument.
Yeah, yeah. In the this court ruling, they say something about, like, hearing or seeing the coach praying is like, that's just part of living in a pluralistic society, that you have to accept that other people are going to exercise their religion. And I mean, yeah, like you say, like they could make the same argument for a prayer at graduation, like that. This is just
Well, that's
someone
what's frustrating
exercising
about it.
their belief. Yeah.
Exactly. They try to portray this as religious freedom, like it's something noble.
Right. Right.
When in
Right.
fact this is coercive. It's about control. It's compulsion, and it's nothing to do with the actual legitimate expression of religion. Which, as I've said, the coach was given every opportunity if he truly felt that he wanted to pray after a game, and maybe he did. They were willing to accommodate that in a way that did not lead to anybody feeling coerced or pressured
Right.
to take part.
Yeah, and I think the court or the majority said, that there was no evidence of coercion or like direct coercion or anything. But obviously, I mean, it's so easy to imagine, from a student's perspective, how this could be coercive. And yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you go back and look at the original school prayer cases from the early 60s, clearly that was coercive. There was the school sponsoring these prayers every day. But there were a lot of people who opposed it but didn't want to speak out. I mean, the people who did speak out got attacked, they got
Yes.
hate
Yes.
mail, they had
Right.
death threats, all sorts of things. So we have no idea how many people in Bremerton might have felt that way, but just didn't want to speak up because they knew that the result of speaking up would be very negative.
Right. So that's why you got to storm the field to show that you're a true believer and
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
and you're standing together.
Well, I mean, I'm not a theologian, but I do find it kind of ironic that if you read the New Testament, Jesus specifically teaches people to not pray in public and
Right.
make a show of your prayers.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
what hypocrites do.
Right.
He advises people to go into a closet and shut the door and pray to God there. And God, who sees in secret, will reward you. So again, not a theologian, but it seems to me that's a fairly clear command about how you're to behave when it comes to prayer.
Yeah, and I mean, there's also something about the way people pray, right? Like as a Christian experience, we understand this fits Christian prayer, right? What we see on TV and how we sort of understand it around us. But this would look very, very different if it were Muslim, right? With ablutions and praying to Mecca. Does their argument work at all with another religion? Would a different religion have passed this case?
Well, certainly, I think if this particular coach had been a Muslim and he'd been engaging in that type of prayer at the 50-yard line, he wouldn't have had the level of public support that he received. I'm sure there's a lot of people trying to shut that down. Now, the folks on the other side of this, they will dismiss arguments like that because they know that the majority of the time in most parts of the country, it's going to be a Christian prayer. But the interesting thing about this is that, as I'm sure both of you know, if you've been following the news lately, the religious demographics of the country really are starting to change in fairly significant ways. Uh, I was shocked to read recently that something like almost 20% of people are now saying they're not sure about the existence of God, or the number really has shot up. Now that's still obviously a minority, but I remember within my lifetime that number was like 96,
Right,
97
right.
people saying they believe. Yeah, very tiny percentage saying they doubted. And at the same time, as I'm sure you know, church attendance rates of house of worship attendance, they've just been plummeting. And people are sort of engaging in this sort of do-it-yourself spirituality and so on. So I do think that there's an opening here for people to say, okay, I mean, if you insist that these public forums are going to exist and we're all going to be able to take advantage of them, then that does mean everybody: Christians, non-Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, Wiccans, pagans, atheists, do your thing. See what
It's a little
happens.
trickier for us to pray in public.
Right. Yes.
Well, yeah, but there have been cases with the display of symbols. Sometimes during the holiday season, they'll let different groups put their symbols up on the town lawn, and atheist groups have taken part of that, not by displaying obviously religious symbols, but symbols and signs that make statements about non-belief. And Freedom from Religion Foundation has done that. American Atheists have done that. Other groups, the Satanic Temple has done that. They brought those messages into public spaces. And it's a way of saying, okay, if you're talking about absolute true tolerance, that includes everybody, even people whose message you may dislike.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just to sort of broaden things a little bit. I mean, obviously, this particular case we've been talking about has come amidst a sort of a tidal wave of terrible
Yeah.
Supreme Court decisions, including the overturning Roe v. Wade.
Public
What?
funding for religious schools in Maine.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I guess amidst all this like really terrible news, what do you think is the law, like the outlook for the future? I mean, is this like what is the chances of sort of turning back this this hold that the religious right has over the judiciary?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to try to sugarcoat this. The next couple of years are going to be very challenging, and we're going to have a lot of work to do. And I think what we're going to need is, first of all, we need to make it explicit how separation of church and state protects many of the rights we're talking about, whether it's LGBTQ rights, reproductive freedom, the right to learn, the right to read, and so on. Those are all intimately connected with separation of church and state, because it's generally very conservative Christian organizations that are attacking, whatever right we may be talking about. So we need an application of separation of church and state to protect those rights. So we're going to need to expand the base and make these other groups understand how important separation of church and state is to the work that they're doing. And we I think, are going to, especially on the question of funding. You mentioned the school funding case out of Maine, where the court is basically saying that if you've got one of these plans that diverts public money into the coffers of private schools, you have to include religious schools. Well, the court hasn't said you have to have those plans. You don't have to have vouchers. You don't have to have laws that divert our public money into religious or private schools. Now, those are entrenched in many states, but we're going to get serious about supporting public education in this country, which educates 90% of our children. We need to get the funding back into the public arena. None of this is going to be easy, but one thing that I do think is interesting is that I've alluded to this earlier. The changing demographics of the country, I think, does provide an opening for us, because the Supreme Court is trying to take this country to a place I don't think most people want to go.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely.
Especially at a time when we're seeing so much, diversity and changing of the demographics. I mean, look at the reaction to the overturning of Roe. It's been very powerful. So there's an opportunity there, but everybody has to understand, again, as I said earlier, long struggle, hunker down, and really get ready for the years, if not decades, that it could take to get this thing back. I'll say one more thing about this. Americans United is a nonpartisan organization, so we don't get involved in politics. But people do need to understand that Supreme Court justices don't just fall out of the sky and land on the court.
Right. Yes.
You know,
Yes.
there's a process.
Hmm.
They're nominated by the president, and they're either confirmed or denied by the Senate. And the reason we're in this mess right now is Donald Trump put 3 reactionary justices on the Supreme Court. So people need to think when they're voting for a president, they are in a sense voting for Supreme Court justices as well.
Yeah, and they're there. Those justices are there for life, so it takes
They
a
are,
long time.
yes. And well, and that is something too maybe we should look at. I mean, we haven't taken an official stand on any of these things in Americans United, but there are proposals out there for term limits, for staggered terms, even expanding the size of the court. You know, those may seem like they're quick fixes, but maybe they're things worth looking at. I mean, honestly, at a time like this, where we're really dealing with a crisis situation, I think we need to think big. Maybe we need to think about constitutional amendments. Maybe we need to think about some changes.
But Rob, the flip side of that problem is that most people voted against Donald Trump, right? Like that's like there's a limit to the voting. Like, and a lot of people wanted what he did, which is a scary, terrible thought, but that's a true thing.
Well, yes, and as painful as that is, it would be a little easier to accept if you weren't aware that, in fact, he did not have majority support. Look, you know, we're not an organization that works on electoral reform or anything like that. But again, you know, maybe we need to look at some of these things, the way things are done. We have a system right now, it seems to me, that puts a lot of power in the hands of small states, rural states, conservative states, non-diverse states. It's a system that you know, again, you're talking about something from the 18th century. The founders got a lot of things right, but that doesn't mean that things can't be changed. We have amended our Constitution several
Yeah.
times in the past.
Yeah, I mean the point you mentioned earlier about just the changing demographics and the growing, well, on the one hand, growing number of people who are non-religious, but also a growing diversity of religions. You know, growing numbers of peoples of non-Christian religions. I guess the thing is, the Republicans have been very savvy and kind of like going after things like the judiciary, which are somewhat, you know, removed from a strictly kind of majoritarian control, I guess. And so I don't think we can. I guess just to say, like, we can't just sort of rely on like, oh, the demographics are changing and things are going to be necessarily better. Like it will, like you said, like it will take organizing and things like this, which the religious or the right has been very
Well,
very good at. Yeah.
absolutely. And we need to address some issues that are not church state issues, like gerrymandering, like voter suppression. And that's not our fight, but that is something that we need to be aware of. And if there are ways we can build bridges and work with organizations that are experts in that area and are working on that issue, I think we ought to do it, because the purpose of things like gerrymandering and voter suppression is to keep certain types of people, to dilute their power and keep them down, and to take away their voice. And the types of voices that they're trying to suppress generally are with voters that conservatives feel aren't going to go their way. So yeah, we absolutely need to be
Yeah.
aware of that.
What I'm worried about is now the other side, right? Like there are people who are voting for the governors who promised trigger laws on day one after Roe. When we think about people advocating for prayer in schools or and you know prayer at a graduation, like what is it that they really want? Like to give us some context, we don't live in this world. We can read the headlines and the court rulings, but it doesn't give us a sense of what their actual end game is. Can you tell us anything like what they're really advocating here?
Yes, I've given us a lot of thought. That's a very good question, because I've been following these movements for more than 3 decades now. And, you know, I've heard so many of their folks talk about this mythical golden age of America that they believe existed, where basically white dudes ran everything. Now, that was a golden age for conservative white guys. It wasn't so great for women. It wasn't so great for minorities. It wasn't so great for members of the LGBTQ community. But, you know, that was the time in the 1950s and so on, when that type of control was held, and we were, you know, a more religious nation and all this sort of thing. I think what's really happened is that these folks have really been frightened by a succession of rights movements that rocked our society, starting with the women's rights movement, and then, well, before that, racial justice, civil rights, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, and even non-believers demanding their rights. So you had this succession of rights movements. And whenever you have that type of experience happening in a fairly condensed period of time, which, we're talking about the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, into the 90s, fairly compact, there's a backlash. And that's, I think, what a lot of Trumpism was about. It was a backlash. Oh, things have happened too fast. Things have gone too far. People were just demanding their rights we have to put brakes on this and all this sort of thing. And, that's the classic demagogue knows how to exploit fears people have, and, tells people that, rights, to my mind, rights aren't a pie that is a finite
Right.
size.
Yes.
And just because one group has rights doesn't mean that they have to be taken from another. We can just, that pies can be really big and there can be enough for everybody. But that message sometimes is very hard for folks to get, especially when there is, there's economic dislocation and there's other types of change occurring in society in ways that really make a lot of people feel like, they're not unsure of what their place in society is anymore. So, you just had this sort of confluence of events that have really just a perfect storm of things. And unfortunately, it created waves of discontent that these social conservatives just rode those waves.
Yeah. And can you talk about, well, just sort of to kind of draw things to a close, what is America, or what is Americans United? What is their role kind of in this fight against the religious rights, kind of rolling back
Yeah.
of these
The counter-revolution. Yeah.
Sure.
The
yeah.
counter-revolution.
Yeah. For a long time, we had this plan. It was a game plan. It was solid. We were in the courts. We were meeting them in the courts. We had lobbyists to meet them on Capitol Hill, and people getting out in state governments and meeting them there and so on. But, that's getting harder to do, especially in the courts, because we know the courts are hostile. So we're going to have to retrench. And I think more and more of our resources in the future are going to have to go into things like a campaign to educate people about the basics. Why is separation of church and state important? I mean, it's a no-brainer to me and probably to you guys as well, but to a lot of people clearly aren't getting it. So we need to go back and really go back to some of the basics on that. Rachel Lazar, who's our president and CEO right now, has been talking about a national recommitment to separation of church and state. And I think that's what we need. Now, what that looks like, how that's executed, how that's put forward, that will be worked out. But clearly, some people are missing some of the basic information there, and we need to make it clear to them, look, if you don't have this right, a lot of your other rights are falling with that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, well, we just kind of touched on it a couple of times already, but it's about building bridges too with other groups. And I mean, maybe, I don't know. I mean, obviously this is an atheist podcast, I guess, but I mean, it is so important. I think that that we reach out to religious groups as well, who these rights are obviously critical to them as well, and they should be aware of that too. And I think working together with progressive religious people, I think, would be really important.
That is essential. That is essential. And I want to stress that because I think the work that the atheist and humanist groups have done in this area has been very important. But I want this coalition to support this national recommitment to separation of church and state to include religious and non-religious people, Christians, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, Wiccans, pagans, whatever. The true diversity of America. And if we have that true diversity, I think that's a powerful demonstration to people, because look at our opponents, and they tend to be fundamentalist Christians. Now they got maybe a smattering of very conservative Jews and occasionally some very conservative people from non-Christian traditions, but generally speaking, it's fundamentalist Christians, not representative of the country as a whole. We want a movement that is representative of the entire
And I
country.
mean, it benefits us all, just conceptually, the concept of the separation of church and state. There's no way for it not to benefit everyone. It benefits the religious, it benefits the irreligious, it benefits the religion, it benefits the government. I mean, this should work for everybody. So, Rob, if people want to get involved with this, going the other way, they want to help AU, they want to add to your cause, what can they do? How do they reach out?
Right. Well, the best thing to do is go to our website, which is really simple. It's au.org. So au.org,
Yeah,
Americans United.
that
Yeah,
is
real
simple.
simple. And
Yes.
there you can find different ways to get involved. You can join, become a member. If you don't want to do that, there's ways to get involved through social media. There's, ways to sign up for alerts from us, and so on. We try to offer a little of something for everybody. I edit this magazine that we publish called Church and State, which comes out every month. Some people still like really, the idea of getting a physical paper magazine every month, but other people would rather be involved on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and Twitter, and we have all of that too. So when you go to the site, au.org, you can see various ways to get involved, and it's really just whatever level you're at, we'll meet you there.
And with that, I think we
Well,
should move on to Can a True Atheist? Yeah,
yes,
Nathan, can you explain the rules? I
but
always forget them.
it's a little bit different. Usually we have something called Can a True Atheist? But we're going to do a sort of special edition this time, given the subject matter, and we're going to call it Can a True Public Official? So the point is to ask kind of questions. Can a true public official do such and such? And Rob, you have to tell us whether a true public official can do certain things. So we'll have a couple or a handful of questions and just a short yes or no, and with a brief
Yeah,
explanation.
you can say as much as you want. This doesn't really count for anything. It's tongue in cheek. It's just to get it going.
All right,
Okay.
Okay,
sounds good.
all right. Can a true public official lead students in bowing to Mecca?
No, a true public official cannot lead students in any kind of religious activity, whether it's Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, Hindu, and they can't promote atheism either. They should be neutral on religious
Oh,
matters.
that's good to know.
Yes,
Okay, can a
yes.
true public official grant a tax exemption to a religious group? Ooh.
Well, now that's an interesting question. If it's only granted to religious organizations, I would say no, but because it would be preferential treatment to religion. But under our system, remember, tax exemption is granted to a whole array of organizations, religious and non-religious. So if you have a system that gives that form of aid, then it's considered a more indirect form of aid to a wide range of groups, religious, environmental, social justice, literary societies, whatever it might be, then you're
All
probably going
right.
to be okay.
Wow, this is a really different version of this game.
Yes.
Normally,
Yeah.
there's no right answer. Today, this is fantastic.
There is a right answer.
Yeah, we're learning.
Yes. Okay. Can a true public official end a speech with "And God bless America"?
Yes, a public official can end a speech with God bless America, which they constantly do in
Yes.
the United States. I don't really like it. I wish they would stop it. I don't hear people saying things like God bless Belgium. I don't know. Maybe they do that, but it doesn't seem like you hear a lot of that. But that sort of thing is usually seen as a private choice of the official giving the speech, and certainly a lot of them from both parties do that.
All right. Hmm. Well, can a true public official use public funds to send children to a school run by the Satanic Temple?
Well, they shouldn't be allowed to, I would say. In my perfect world, there would be no government funding of religious schools at all, whether they be Christian, Jewish, Satanic, or whatever they might be. We would direct public funds only to public schools. However, the Supreme Court has upheld voucher plans, and under the voucher plans, the government isn't supposed to discriminate. So we do have cases where vouchers exist, where Muslim schools have participated, and other types of non-Christian schools and Jewish schools have participated. Now, not very many, but they have done it. So in theory, if the Satanic Temple got together and decided to open a private school, and this was somewhere where voucher plans existed, they could conceivably take part in
Wow.
that plan.
Damn, they got to get on that.
Can a true public official ask members of the public to join them in praying to the sun?
I'd like to see that, actually. I think that would be very interesting. Again, that's kind of like ending your speech with "God bless America." I'm not crazy about it. I wish that politicians would dial back the God talk. I wish they would be respectful of the fact that we're very diverse when it comes to religion. Stop making assumptions that everybody's religious when growing numbers of people are not. But just as they could ask people to join in a prayer to Jesus Christ, I suppose they could also ask for a prayer to the sun or to Zeus or to some other deity that we don't often think of, but that people used to
Mm.
worship.
Okay, how about this one? Can a true public official wear a hijab to work?
Yes, a public official can wear religious garb to work. And in fact, we see examples of that pretty commonly in government right now. Don't really have a problem with that. At, say, a government meeting like Congress, state legislatures, that sort of thing. Now, I do think certain types of garb you might be able to control in a public school system if the garb were designed to send a proselytizing message or to coerce students to take part in religion. But something like a cross, a fairly non-obtrusive piece of jewelry, I think
Mhm.
that's going to be okay.
Okay. And last but not least, can a true public official leave their copy of Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion in a conspicuous place on their desk?
Yes, a public official can
Okay.
do that. And again, that's something I'd like to see. Just as they could leave a Bible there or a Koran, they could leave a book by Richard Dawkins or some other humanist atheist thinker, and that would certainly be. This might spark some interesting discussion for the
Yes,
future.
indeed.
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely.
Yeah.
Speaking of which,
Okay.
this has been
Yeah.
fantastic,
Yeah.
Rob. Thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, good luck to Americans United. It's a great cause, and I hope people realize how united we should be on this issue. Anything else you'd like to plug, Rob?
Actually, there is. My colleague, Andrew Seidel, who some of you may know, he used to work for Freedom from Religion Foundation. He's now with Americans United. He wrote this really great book called The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American, which is just an incredible book. I recommend it. But he has a new book coming out soon, American Crusade, How the Supreme Court is Weaponizing Religious Freedom. So it really touches on a lot of the issues that we've been discussing. And that's due out really soon this fall. So I would recommend that folks get a copy of that because that's going to be let's just say it's going to be an arsenal. It's going to provide you with a lot of good arguments.
Yeah, that sounds great. And we'll include a link to that down below. Yeah, thanks again, Rob. This was great. Okay, that was Rob Boston from Americans United for the Separation of Church and State. Todd, what were some of your takeaways from that?
We're fucked. That's it. That's the
Yeah.
whole of it. No, I mean it's amazing that like he's able to go back and document the swings. That's pretty awesome. That like there's that historical legacy. The history of it was really phenomenal, especially the early stuff he came up with. I never heard about that about like states having their own established churches and what that meant to people. It's crazy stuff. It's omitted history. And that's a huge deal for us. We're people who seek out this information, and it's stuff that I didn't know until now.
The particularly like the founding of the Americans United. I mean, the fact that like it was not a non-religious organization. I mean, it was started by Christians. I think was really fascinating, and I mean instructive that secular issues shouldn't necessarily be the sole domain of atheists and other non-religious people. I mean, everyone's got a stake in this.
Right. How do you feel about like working with religionists in something like this? Like
I
uniting
think,
together
yeah,
with them, Nathan.
I think, I think that it makes a lot of sense because even though, we said a couple of times non-religious people during the episode, like non-religious people are a growing percentage of the population, but still a minority. The majority of the people are still religious in some way. But I think that many of them would be allies because they would see that it's like there's a very particular majority kind of or no sorry a particular kind of religion like being pushed. I mean, like a particular kind of like evangelicalism being pushed, and I think many religious people would have an interest in that not being, like even and in this particular case of the high school football coach. I mean, if there's someone like who's Muslim or something who's you know, and like all the other classmates are sort of going to go to this coach praying in the middle of the field or something.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, this is going to exclude them too.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think that I mean, again, like maybe even like I don't know, another like an atheist podcast. I mean, probably most of the people listening to it are not religious, but nonetheless, I think we should seek out allies among the religious people.
Yeah, and I mean, it also, and thinking about demographics again, like it throws into relief the fact that we're one of the largest. I mean, if you think about it this way, one of the largest religious groups. We're bigger than most
Yeah. Yes.
non-majority
Yes.
religions. Like
Yeah.
it's just that's a
Hmm.
fact.
Yeah.
Non-religious are almost as big as Christian evangelicals. Maybe by the time this goes out, they are the same size. That's a simple fact, and it makes sense for us to get under the same umbrella in this case.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. I mean, the funny thing, or not funny. I mean, like it's already like a case that the majority of people are sort of opposed to what the Supreme Court's been up to. I mean, in the Roe v. Wade thing again, like a fairly clear majority, I think, like supports.
Super duper majority
Yes.
is the technical term for it. It's
Right.
85 to 90% of Americans support some form of abortion,
Is
like
it really that
abortion with
high?
restriction. Yeah, it's that high because it includes it. Like that means like okay, medical
Okay.
necessity,
Right.
rape and
Okay. Okay.
incest. Talking about those
Right.
cases, it
Okay.
starts to go down. But even when you start to like do things like abortion in the first 16 weeks, it's still incredibly high.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
still a
Yes.
majority.
Hmm.
So it's
Hmm.
like it's a weird argument where everybody agrees. It's really strange, and then this super small minority gets to make the decisions for us.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's
That's the thing.
and
Yeah.
that's really, I think, part of what we're. This is something I've kind of realized in the past few weeks. Like, yeah, most of the time we're talking about the religious right, like as atheists. When you're offended by religion, when you're upset about religion, when you're angry that they're getting some certain privilege, for the most part it's the Christian right, it's Christian nationalists. Like it's this very particular strain that have very particular demands and expect to get them and are now getting them.
Yeah. I sort of wonder in the early 2000s, we saw a similar sort of thing where under the like in the Bush administration, a really like a strong kind of evangelical power. And then, but we saw a huge reaction to that, which led to kind of the new atheist movement, and really a lot of people becoming more outspokenly non-religious. And if there's anything good that will come out of these terrible rulings, maybe I don't know. Maybe I wonder if we'll see another kind of upswing of people becoming atheists, becoming non-religious, who
Why
are
you
yeah
that's where we got to be, Nathan. We got to meet our people. We got to go out in the
yeah.
streets. That's where we got to go to these rallies. We got to get out. We got to do this stuff,
Hmm.
not
Not
sit behind
necessarily
microphones.
not necessarily me and you in particular, but like yes, the sort of abstract we yeah
Oh yeah, I see. Already pawning it off on someone else, Nathan.
yes well
Fantastic. That's
yeah
why, and we wonder why this movement doesn't
right
grow. I
yes
mean, the other side, like what Rob was talking about, like they're focused for
yeah
49 years on this one
yeah
singular goal. And
right
I mean,
yeah
personally, I think it's a little bit of sort of outlawing payphones to stop people from taking taxis. Oh, they're so clever, right? Like they got rid of antiquated technology in some ways, right? The rulings don't match the current way things are done. With abortion, it's like most of them are done with pharmaceuticals. They're done at home. You get them online. It's mailed to your house. Don't need a doctor. Nobody has to know. That's the way it's been working now. That number is going to go up. People are going to find this stuff. And this is a way that like atheist engagement needs to be not just, yeah, like let's go friggin' show what's wrong with religion, but also like how are we going to do things to make sure that they will never step on our throats again.
and yeah and I think yeah giving like practical assistance as
Absolutely.
well
Yeah.
is
Yeah,
important too.
yeah. And Rob helped really clarify for me a lot of like what we're up against, like where this is coming from. As he talked about, it's not just this. These cases aren't accidental. It's
Yeah,
not just
yeah,
one guy.
hmm
Nathan, he's
yeah,
just one lone Christian up against these
right,
lions. What's he going to
exactly.
do?
Yes,
Right? So he's just going to do
yeah,
what a normal guy does, goes to the
hmm
court and prays.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
Argues with wide eyes and an open heart, and the power
yeah,
of the Lord.
exactly.
Like, no,
Yes,
that's not at all what happened. It's
yeah,
it's what $1 billion in funding from right wing groups to get
yeah, yeah, and I mean, it's not even about the prayer. I mean, it's really about like the politics. I mean, I was just
totally. It's
thinking
about
like
power, right?
the fact, yes, yeah, yeah, like of like needing of him needing this to be a public spectacle and like contacting the press to make sure people saw it and so on, um, to get people riled up about it.
This
It's
guy went a long way to get a lot of people to pay attention to him.
yeah, yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's not even, yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting. Like we talked a little bit about it in the episode. Like what actually do they want? I mean, it's not. They don't really care that much about this particular individual praying or not. I mean, like obviously he can pray if he wants to. I mean, nothing is stopping him. It's yeah, it is about power, I guess, at the base of it. Yeah,
And it's not about everybody else. It's not about equality.
right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
It's
Yeah,
about
yeah.
this particular type of
Mm-hmm.
prayer. You want to
Mm-hmm.
be able to do things in this particular way.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, let's get in the time machine. Go back to the 1950s, where everything was perfect, right? Great.
Yes. I mean,
Nostalgia for an age that never existed. It's wonderful.
yeah. That's
God.
the funny thing about. I mean, like the whole "Make America Great Again." Like, well, when was it great? And then people are like, well, you know,
Yeah.
the '50s. Like,
Yeah.
wait a sec. Like, you know, when segregation was still around.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
well,
Yeah. Uh huh.
yeah,
Not
yeah.
that apple pie just tasted
It's
sweeter back then.
uncomfortable questions. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I
Yep.
could pronounce the baseball players' names. Yeah. Great.
Right. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, and we know in the back of our heads, one of the things that happen, like when we think about the demographics, one of the things that we're thinking about, but maybe not saying, is like, look, this is gonna die. People die, right? If religion is really dense at this end of the age spectrum, that means in a few years it's gonna be thin the whole way down,
Yeah.
right? But when you start having laws like this, where you get people praying, pretending to pray, putting on a big show about praying, that the whole thing is to lock everybody in, and then it never
Yeah.
goes away.
Yeah. And to make it sort of like the oxygen, just that it just sort of exists, that it's just normal, it's the default.
Yeah, that's the
Um,
totality of your life. It defines your being. So that's, I mean, and that's what we're up against, and that's what AU is doing. The Americans United for Separation of Church and State, which I see why they shorten it to AU. That makes a lot of
yeah,
sense.
yeah, yeah,
But I
um,
mean, it's work that needs to be done, and
yeah,
intersectionality.
yeah,
I'm just thankful that
mhm,
someone's doing it.
yeah. And I think the fact, he's been a part of the organization for over 30 years. I mean, obviously there were other bleak times too. I mean, I'm sure in the 80s, uh, it was also bleak. But yeah,
That's right, Nathan. You're
yeah,
right. You're absolutely right. Leave
but
us on a message of hope. What can
yeah,
you
I
tell
mean,
us? What are you gonna do for
no, I mean,
to make this hopeful? So we can end on a high note. We need it. We need a palate
yeah.
cleanser. What have you got?
I mean, I do agree with him that it's
Oh
gonna be a
Jesus.
difficult few years.
Oh
But I
God.
mean, I think
I'm going into a hole now, Nathan.
you know, one of the Martin Luther King. Oh God, this is the really white people quoting MLK is always
uh,
awkward. But like the what is it? The arc of the
the arc of
universe
history
bends,
tends towards justice.
but yeah, which is paraphrasing an abolitionist from the 19th century, Theodore Parker, who his quote was more sort of long-winded, but Martin Luther King Jr. made it more succinct.
And that's
Yeah.
why he's the one who's quoted.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
why we
Yeah.
remember him.
Yeah. Yeah. So on that awkwardly, hopefully optimistic note.
I feel better.
Yeah.
You know what Shakespeare said? Brevity is wit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brevity is something. Yeah.
Brevity is wit. Nope, that's what it was. Nothing else in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, right. So people should definitely check out our bonus section with Rob. It was really fascinating this time.
Super enlightening.
We talked about some of the weird cases he's come across, some of his personal observations of the court when he's been there to observe it.
Right.
Really
Scalia this
interesting
time. We're
stuff.
learning so much about the Supreme Court from this.
Yeah.
What they're actually like.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So please, if you're interested in that, subscribe to our Patreon. And for those of you already subscribed, Lars, Debbie, and the AHS Plus blog, thank you so much. We
Big
really appreciate
ups.
it.
Yes, thank you. And thank everyone for listening. You're the reason we do this show, that in the absence of a divine deity. Um, if you can't pitch us a few bucks, like and subscribe below. Hit us up anytime at Nath G Alexander at the Twitters. And what else? There must be more people to thank. Nathan,
Well, I
who
guess we
else we
should
got?
just close by just thanking Rob one more time.
Let's see. Yeah,
Check out
Rob
Americans
Boston.
United.
Yeah, we got links below. Check out the books. And yeah, see you later.